Hola a todo el mundo y bienvenido a mi canal. Yo me llamo Sirey. Soy una abogada afro-latina licenciada y practicando los leyes criminales, pero como todos ustedes, a mí me fascina cuando estamos hablando de casos de crímenes reales. En este video vamos a hablar del caso de Natalie Cochran. Si quieren más video en español, nada más dime allá abajo. Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Desiree. I'm a licensed and practicing Afro-Latina criminal attorney who, much like the rest of you, has a severe fascination with true crime cases. Listen, the case we're going to talk about today is actually currently ongoing. At the time of me filming this video, the case is currently still in trial. This was a really interesting case to me, and I wanted to make sure to discuss it with you guys. But there's not a lot of background information on the alleged victim of Miss Cochran's crime, but I scraped up what I could. Let's just go ahead and get started. Natalie P. Cochran is a 40-year-old former pharmacist based out of Raleigh County, West Virginia. Natalie was married to her husband, Michael Cochran, for nearly 2 decades. That marriage produced 2 kids, Natalie and Michael's 20-year-old daughter, Nicole, and a minor son who's 17. The son has not been named publicly, obviously because he's a minor, but his initials are M.A.C. According to the couple's daughter, Nicole, and Natalie's sister, Penny, Michael had a troubled relationship with pills and supplements.
Are you familiar with his medication taking?
Yes.
What was he taking his medication for?
Most of what he took was for gaining muscle, like for working out supplements and things.
Okay. What type of medication was he taking? Do you know?
I know that he took steroids, and he took many other supplements, but I don't know the names of the supplements.
Let me cut to the chase. Did you know that Michael Cochran was using any substances?
Yes.
What kind of substances was he using?
I don't really know what they were, but he had a lot of things in cabinets and on the counter and stuff. He took stuff. I usually saw him take them in the mornings when I was there.
What was he using those substances for?
To be buffer, bigger, to be stronger.
M.A.C., the couple's minor son, said his father would become aggressive and forgetful during the months leading up to his death.
He got sick?
He got sick, and I feel like around that time it was when you could just notice that he started to change a little bit.
How did he start to change, sir?
Just forgetting stuff all the time. And he was more aggressive for sure.
Towards whom? Aggressive?
Towards everybody.
Michael Cochran was pronounced dead on February 11th of 2019. He was merely 38 years old. 5 days prior to his death, on February 6th of 2019, Natalie told her neighbor Jennifer Davis that she had been up all night with an 103-degree temperature. In addition to being a neighbor, Jennifer was Natalie's close friend. News of Natalie's ailments worried her, specifically because Jennifer believed Natalie to have cancer and be undergoing chemotherapy. Natalie told Jennifer that some of the negative effects of her chemotherapy were somehow quelled by the use of insulin. Although none of the Cochran family members were diabetic, Natalie knew that Jennifer's son was. Out of worry for Natalie, Jennifer sent her husband to the Cochran household to deliver some insulin. About noon that same day, on February 6th of 2019, Michael had become completely unconscious, and he collapsed in the kitchen of the couple's home. Shortly after Michael's collapse, prosecutors said that the very first thing Natalie did was photograph him. She took a photo and sent it to neighbors, friends, family alike. She did not call 911, nor did she rush her husband to the emergency room. After taking the photograph, Natalie called over 2 construction workers who assisted Michael and her from occasion to occasion. One of the construction workers was named Jason Bowen. When the construction workers arrived at the home, Natalie asked them to help her move Michael's body from the kitchen floor to the couch. And they did. Michael laid on that couch for the entirety of the rest of that day. Prosecutors estimate that was about 6 full hours. After calling the construction workers over, Natalie requested a friend of theirs, John J.D. Hamilton, to come over and take a look at Michael. J.D. took one good look at Michael and called his wife, Stephanie, who was a physician's assistant. Stephanie came over and urged Natalie to get Michael assistance immediately. In direct defiance of Stephanie's derivative, Natalie did not get Michael any help. Roughly 3 hours after that, things had deteriorated to the point where Michael lost control of his bladder. He urinated all over himself. One would think that at that point, Natalie would take Michael to the emergency room, but no. Instead, Natalie called her sister Penny over and asked Penny to help her change Michael's clothing, which they did. Then he continued to remain on the couch. By 6 p.m. that evening, on February 6th of 2019, Michael's best friend Chris Davis went to the Cochran household. He took one good look at Michael and told Natalie that they were going to the emergency room. Natalie insisted that Michael didn't want to go. She said that Michael did not want to go get checked out, which is kind of odd considering he's completely unconscious at this point. Chris took charge. They took Michael to the hospital. They all go to Raleigh General Hospital where Michael is checked out by staff. According to Natalie, Michael's blood glucose level was in the 140s during the day, but the staff at Raleigh's General Hospital just found something different. They noted that Michael's blood glucose level was merely 21. At about 10 p.m. that same evening, on February 6th of 2019, Natalie sent Michael's mother a text message to inform her that they were going from Raleigh General Hospital to another hospital, CAAC. What prosecutors found rather interesting about this is the fact that Natalie's mother-in-law, Michael's mother, is a former registered nurse who was only 10 minutes away from them when they were at home. After being at CCAC for 2 days, Michael was transferred to hospice, where he was declared dead 5 hours later. His cause of death? Damage to the brain by insulin. So what happened? Michael was a seemingly healthy 38-year-old man. By everyone's account, he was very physically fit. Here's what prosecutors alleged to be the motive. From June 17th to August 22nd of 2019, Natalie ran a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. She convinced at least 11 people, including friends and family, to invest into her business where she was selling federal government contracts. The only problem with that is she wasn't. Prosecutors state that she was able to defraud her victims of $2.5 million. Her investors included Michael's parents, her friends, and even her own parents. Instead of investing the money she received, Natalie put it all into personal and business bank accounts. Natalie admitted to using her investors' funds to make numerous purchases over $10,000. One of those such purchases was a $37,500 1965 Shelby Cobra. On September 21st of 2020, Natalie pled guilty to wire fraud and money laundering charges. Ultimately, she was sentenced to 135 months, which is a little over 11 years, in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. In addition to the sentence, she was ordered to pay $2.5 million in restitution to her victims and serve a 3-year term of supervised release. Supervised release is a term of supervision that follows a prison sentence. It is different from merely probation because typically when someone is placed on probation, they don't do a prison sentence preceding that. They may do some jail time in addition to the probation, but supervised release is what follows the prison sentence. While serving the underlying sentence, prosecutors formally indicted Natalie on murder charges in November of 2021. In April 2023, prosecutors dismissed the indictment and all charges against Natalie because they wanted to exhume Michael's body for further testing. 6 months later, in October of 2023, prosecutors re-indicted Natalie for the murder of her husband. You might be thinking to yourself, well, how on earth is it possible that they're able to dismiss the charges and then refile the charges, the exact same charges, against Natalie? I will explain. If a prosecutor moves to dismiss a case without prejudice, that means they have leave to refile it in the near future or whenever they so choose, right? Otherwise, if a prosecutor moves to dismiss a case with prejudice, they do not have the opportunity to refile those charges. According to prosecutors, Michael was completely unaware of his wife's involvement in this Ponzi scheme. But that was soon to change. The investors of the Ponzi scheme were asking Michael, where was the return on their investment? Michael in turn asked Natalie, and Natalie explained that the funds were in a Bank of America in Lindbergh, Virginia. On a mission, Michael and Natalie booked tickets to go to that Bank of America in Lindbergh, Virginia, and check on those funds. The date of that flight? February 6th of 2019. Prosecutors allege before Michael was unconscious on the couple's kitchen that morning, Natalie coincidentally canceled that flight. Prosecutors also confirmed that they were unable to find any money or any bank account in any Bank of America in Lindbergh, Virginia. Because Natalie's a pharmacist, she knew how insulin would affect someone's system. But on top of being a pharmacist, Natalie held herself out as a specialist in nothing other than diabetic counseling. The first day of Natalie's murder trial began on January 15th of 2025. Prosecutor Tom Truman argued that Natalie killed her husband to cover up her dirty dealings.
This was a healthy man until she did him in. Now that answers the how. Why? Why would this happen? And why would it happen when it happened? Well, as the defense counsel informed you during question, the defendant had run a Ponzi scheme, a big one, where millions of dollars were taken from friends, relatives, local professionals. As many deceptions and lies as were told to her victims of the Ponzi scheme, Michael Cochran was told just as many. He did not know what was going on, but he was determined to find out Because people were saying, hey, we invested in your company in this plan, and we're not getting our money back. And he was frustrated. He was very frustrated. But the same excuses provided by the defendant to all of her victims in the Ponzi scheme were being provided to Michael Cochran, too. It's everybody's fault under the sun. They've got hundreds of millions of dollars in their money stuck in a bank in Virginia, Bank of America. That's what she told Michael Cochran. That's what he believed. So Michael Cochran is going to straighten this out. They charter a flight from Beckley to the Bank of America branch in Lynchburg, Virginia for the 6th of February, 2019. Mysteriously, the defendant cancels that trip in early morning hours. Why was that trip so important? Because Michael Cochran and everybody else would know at that point. There is no money in the Bank of America in Virginia. There's never been any money in the Bank of America in Virginia. There are no government contracts, which is what she was selling to the most of Raleigh County, it seems like. Those were fictitious things that she made up and built millions of dollars out of her victims. Now, we're not going to pretend Michael Cochran didn't get a benefit from this. He did. The defendant and her family lived a very lavish lifestyle with other people's money. And Trooper Hinzman will explain to you in an overview, because this case isn't the Ponzi scheme case. That one's over. This is a murder case. But he'll explain to you how the defendant did this and how she was able to pull this off for so long and how she got so many people to forfeit their money to her. That was all going to blow up on February 6th. And it would have been over February 6th. But of course, the Cochrans never made it from Beckley to Lynchburg. And Michael Cochran is dead because of this.
He further argued that Michael was just far too close to learning the truth, and Natalie had to prevent him from gaining that knowledge one way or another. Defense attorney Matthew Victor, on the other hand, argued that not only was Michael well aware of Natalie's involvement in this scheme, he was a part of it.
She's not a murderer, as the evidence will show. Now, she is accused here by the state of West Virginia of one of the vilest crimes there is known. And I will submit to you that the state's motive in this case, as they presented to you, is absolute nonsense. The state of West Virginia is trying to tell you that my client, Natalie Cochran, who has lived with the man who was up to his eyeballs in the Ponzi scheme, somehow detected that he was on her. He was already detecting that she was committing a major fraud, and he was going to run straight to the federal government. Well, think about it, ladies and gentlemen, as you listen to the evidence. The state would want you to believe that he didn't know anything about the Ponzi scheme, didn't know anything about millions of dollars and the lavish lifestyle. He didn't know anything about this, even though the evidence will show that he was signing all these contracts, he was working on the contracts, he was signing checks, and you will see that evidence, you will hear that evidence. And all of a sudden, he found out that Natalie Cochran, his beloved wife, is a fraud and a cheat. And what was he gonna do? No, he was not gonna go and talk to her and try to resolve this case somehow, get a lawyer. Well, no. The evidence will show, well, at least the state's evidence will show, that she's going to run to the federal government and turn her and turn her in and have the dear wife, the mother of his children, locked up in prison. Well, okay, think about that.
Mr. Victor continued that because of that, there was no motive for this murder. The state's case is pretty much circumstantial. Prosecutor Tom Truman admitted that, but that doesn't make it any less provable. There are two ways that a prosecutor can prove their case, and that is through direct evidence or circumstantial evidence. Direct evidence is a first-hand account or causal link to what the prosecutors are alleging. Examples of direct evidence include DNA, fingerprints, or surveillance footage. Circumstantial evidence is an indirect type of evidence that doesn't provide a first-hand account of what the prosecutors are alleging to have occurred. The perfect example and the most commonly used example of circumstantial evidence is you go to bed, you wake up, you look outside, and there's snow on the ground. You assume that it snowed when you were asleep because you see the snow on the ground. But because you didn't see it falling from the sky, that is circumstantial. In every trial that I've done, the court will direct the jurors that both circumstantial and direct evidence are to be given equal weight. Although it's not impossible to prove a case based solely on circumstantial evidence, I'd say that most prosecutors probably want one piece of direct evidence to make that causal link. If you really sit back and think about it, most murderers have some sort of circumstantial evidence, right? Because the person who passed away can't come and testify. So prosecutors do have to make that link of what happened that led to the murder. Following opening statements, the prosecution called their first witness, State Trooper Robert Hinzman. Mr. Hinzman is the state trooper that investigated the underlying case that led to Ms. Cochran's federal conviction.
You opened an investigation.
Yes.
And you determined that the defendant was in fact operating a Ponzi scheme.
Yes. The defendant had a business and was operating a Ponzi scheme.
In summary fashion, what was the overview of the business that she pretended to have?
The business purported to be a supplier of durable goods and other materials to government contracts. So the federal government would need to buy supplies or goods. They would put out an announcement for businesses to bid on these contracts to fulfill their needs. And then federal contractors, businesses would bid on these contracts, get awarded the contract, then the business should supply the good to the government and get paid for the good they provided. That was the purpose of the business. That's what the business purported to be.
And you did an extensive investigation that culminated in the federal conviction that you have at State's Exhibit 1, correct?
Yes.
Now, the defense has floated the theory that Michael Cochran was up to his eyeballs in this Ponzi scheme. From your investigation, do you have any evidence that would support that?
Let me state by saying the business itself, in its appearance, in its existence, was legitimate. The business was legitimately set up. It was registered with the state of West Virginia. It was registered with the federal government. So Michael Cochran was aware of the business, and because he participated with what he believed was a legitimate business.
I'm going to object, Judge, as to what Mr. Cochran may have believed. That's calls for speculation.
You can continue, please. So during our investigation, we reviewed many financial records, many documents to determine if any government contracts existed, any federal government contracts had been awarded to this business, and we could not find any contracts whatsoever where the government had awarded these. Now, there was one state of West Virginia contract that was that Mr. Cochran had, or the business had bid on, but they never fulfilled that contract. So beyond this one contract, there were never any contracts that we could find to support what the business purported to do. Also, in reviewing these documents, there were applications made to financial institutions, and many of those documents only bore the name of Mrs. Cochran in the business, and those documents would purport that she was a 100% owner of the business. So there was a suggestion or an indication that Mr. Cochran didn't know about certain documents that because he wasn't listed on certain documents. In addition to that, the victim investors of this financial crime were given reasons. They were given information to induce their investment. They were given information regarding them getting their investment money returned to them, the money they should have earned on their investment. So the information that was false or deceptive that was being given to victim investors of the business was the exact same information that was being given to Mr. Cochran when he would question why the business hadn't received its money from the contracts. He did participate in looking for contracts for the business to bid on, but that was about the extent of his involvement. He would search the internet and the federal websites to identify federal contracts that the business could bid on. But the structure was that Mrs. Cochran would go out and secure those contracts from the government.
Natalie pretended to be a federal contracting company that sold federal government contracts upon which the federal government would bid for goods. If she were to receive any of those bids, then her federal contracting company would output the supplies that the federal government was requesting. Mr. Hinzman further stated that he combed through numerous documents, including one that stated Natalie was 100% owner of the business. One of Natalie's defense attorneys, Matthew Victor, did a pretty good job at trying to discredit Mr. Hinzman's testimony that Michael knew nothing of his wife's dealings.
I understand that you were involved in every aspect of the federal investigation of Natalie Cochran. Is that right?
I left the state police before the indictment, before she was indicted.
Before the federal indictment?
Before the actual indictment occurred, but the information that was obtained to bring that about, yes.
Prior to that, you were involved in every aspect of that investigation?
Yes, sir.
All right. So you wouldn't know what the federal government alleged in the indictment?
No, I do know what they alleged in the indictment.
Well, is it true that the federal government alleged that both Mr. Cochran and Ms. Cochran got involved in a scheme, but Mr. Cochran died, what the federal government called unexpectedly in 2019. So she was the only one who got indicted. Is that true?
I would not characterize it as such. No.
Did you see the forfeiture documents that the federal government filed against the Cochrans?
Yes, some of those.
Some of those. And in those documents, federal government alleges that they were both involved in the scheme, right?
Without reviewing the documents, I don't know.
All right, we'll come back to this. Mr. Hinzman, did you know that Mr. and Mrs. Cochran did not have any, or did not list any, source of income past 2017? Did you know that or not?
They didn't list it where?
In their tax returns.
No.
You didn't know that, okay?
I don't know if that's true, but I did not know.
I didn't ask you whether you knew it was true. I just asked you whether you knew that they did that. And the answer is no. did you know, did you look at the, well, I mean, you investigated this case thoroughly. Did you ever consider looking at the forfeiture clause or forfeiture document filed by the federal government? Did you?
Again, this came after I had already left, so
Okay.
I didn't see this at that time, no.
So if I told you that in the year of 2018, under Schedule C for Tactical Solutions, Mr. and Mrs. Cochran listed the gross sales and gross profits for the Tactical Solution group, the gross profit of $12,406,564. Would that surprise you?
No, I did see those documents, yes.
Mr. Hinzman, the wife comes home and the husband comes home and says, honey, we just filed the taxes. Our income is $12 million. And then what?
That's not how the documents ran with this business or with the Cochrans, so that would not be the case.
For the profit of the TSM, $12 million. Where did that come from, sir? And even better, the wife says to, the husband says to the wife, honey, where did that 12 mil come from? And you still testify here today under oath that he didn't know anything about the illicit Ponzi scheme? Is that your testimony here today?
Yes, he did not know anything about the Ponzi scheme.
Okay.
Prosecution's second witness was Natalie's neighbor, Jennifer Davis. Jennifer testified that on the day in question, Natalie requested that she bring insulin over because it would help with her chemotherapy. Through this witness, the prosecutor was able to get in multiple text messages, including a photograph that Natalie had sent Jennifer of Michael's unconscious body.
Okay, Jennifer, can you tell me who that's a picture of?
Mike.
That's Mike. And Natalie sent you that photograph?
Yes.
Did she provide any context for that? Did she call you or anything? Or is this, you
No.
just received this out of the blue?
Just that.
What did this picture mean to you when you received it?
I mean, just,
Judge, I'm going to object to this form of question. What do we need to
I think it's fair. I'm going to overrule the objection. The witness can answer.
just that it was just shocking that he was laying there.
But you didn't know what his condition was at that point? Is that
No.
fair?
No.
The first day of trial concluded with the prosecutors calling John J.D. Hamilton, who testified that Natalie really didn't want to take Michael to the hospital. The second and third day of the prosecution's case in chief continued when they called J.D.'s wife, Stephanie, as well as Jason Bowen, the construction worker that helped move Michael's body from the kitchen to the couch. The fourth day of trial, January 18th of 2025, the prosecution called in its expert witnesses.
And what did you determine were Michael Cochran's cause and manner of death?
Michael Cochran's cause and manner of death there's a lot of circumstantial evidence in this case that does not correlate with the autopsy findings or medical record. And whenever we have that, I call it a discordance, or things that don't add up or make sense, those are sort of the red flags that we look at. With the entirety of the circumstances, including the initial autopsy findings, the second autopsy findings, which there weren't much, the history of profound hypoglycemia that's very much unexplained, I came to the conclusion that the cause of death was exogenous insulin administration, and there's no explanation for why a non-diabetic, otherwise relatively healthy male would have such profound hypoglycemia and also refractory hypoglycemia as well. And there's no other viable explanation for it. That the only reasonable conclusion that I could make is that he was given insulin.
And so specifically, what is his manner of death?
Manner of death would be homicide, because there's no evidence that he administered insulin himself. People don't accidentally administer insulin to themselves or am given.
Your Honor, we object at this time. The statement that it is a homicide, that's for this court to decide. It is a conclusion that this witness cannot come to.
Your Honor, that is a manner of death which is determined by all medical examiners.
Objections overruled.
Dr. Diane Krieger, an endocrinologist and diabetes expert, testified that when Michael was admitted to the hospital on February 6th of 2019, his glucose level was 21. She stated that a glucose level of 21 is extremely low, and it could have been caused by an excess dose of insulin.
Doctor, you indicated you had the records from Raleigh General Hospital from his admission on February 6th of 2019. Did you see in there the blood glucose level that Raleigh General's testing detected?
Yes.
What was it?
21.
21. What's the clinical significance of a 21 blood glucose level?
I would call that a profoundly low blood sugar. Very, very low, which we rarely see. And it's at the magnitude that we were seeing in the cases that I reviewed in the other two series that I told you about, where it's extremely low. I would say that, for me, it's a big call to attention. What is this about? Why is this sugar so low? And an autopsy report.
And that the autopsy report was from the State Medical Examiner's Office in West Virginia, is that correct?
That is correct.
Doctor, what's the cause of death of Michael Cochran, according to your review of the records?
Well, I'm not a cause of death expert since I'm an endocrinologist. My expertise is in hypoglycemia, but it appears that his death was related to hypoglycemia, which then produced cerebral edema.
And that's what I'd ask you, if you feel competent to do so. Can you explain what cerebral edema is?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't hear you well.
Sure. Can you explain to us what cerebral edema is?
Certainly. Cerebral edema is swelling of the brain cells, and that is usually caused by either not enough blood sugar going to the brain cells or not enough oxygen going to the brain cells.
In your report, you indicate a number of, for lack of a better word, pieces of information or tests that could have been performed at one point or another that would have helped you be more definitive in your assessment of the case. Could you explain to me what you meant by that?
Yes. When a person presents with a very low blood sugar, which we call hypoglycemia, there are very specific tests that should be done prior to the treatment of the low blood sugar. There are a list of tests. I can tell you each one specifically if you'd like.
Please.
But you would like me to? Okay. We do an insulin level, a C-peptide level, a pro-insulin level, a beta-hydroxybutyrate, a glutinized sulfonylurea screen, And those tests help us determine whether the low blood sugar was related to insulin or not, and where the insulin could have come from. The test needs to be done prior to the treatment of the low blood sugar.
In this case,
unfortunately, in this case, the tests were not performed. I can tell you that I've reviewed many cases, as I told you, of my prior experience, and it is close to zero in any of those cases that the tests were performed. And it's unfortunate because it really helps make a determination about the cause of the low blood sugar.
Okay, so there was a limit, as state understands your testimony, doctor, there was a limited time during which those tests that you mentioned could have been performed that would have helped definitively determine the insulin issue.
That's right. The test should have been performed on arrival at the emergency room when the other blood tests were performed, or as soon as it became evident that the blood sugar was extremely low.
Dr. Krieger further stated that normal glucose levels are anywhere between 80 and 100. Dr. Krieger further testified that known causes of hypoglycemia, such as severe malnutrition and drugs, were not at play in Michael's murder. The fifth day of Natalie's trial continued on January 22nd. On this date, the prosecution called Lieutenant Tim Bledsoe, who testified that Natalie gave him 3 different versions of what happened.
You interviewed the defendant on 3 different occasions, is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you have any recollection of the dates of those interviews?
Yes. I believe the first interview took place on or about April the 8th of 2019. The second interview was on or about May 7th of 2019. And the third was on the following day, May the 8th, 2019.
And did anyone accompany the defendant at any of those interviews?
The first interview was actually done in person with the defendant, and yes, her mother was present. The second and third interviews were done by telephone.
During the first interview, did the defendant tell you or give you her recollection of what happened to Michael the morning of February 6th?
Yes.
Could you elaborate?
Yes. She said that, as I stated earlier, they were in the residence together, and that Mr. Cochran had suddenly went into the kitchen, and she had heard a noise in there. I think she said it was a thud. She gave the time reference in that interview of 10 a.m. that morning. She went into the kitchen, and Mr. Cochran was in the floor, and that she had discovered a bottle of enclomiphene citrate on the kitchen counter when she went into the kitchen.
And did she also provide a recollection of events of February 6th during your second interview?
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that for us?
Yes. At that time, she said that the morning of February 6th, that when she and Michael returned home, that they had sat together for approximately an hour, and that Michael Cochran was doing the best that he had ever done in his life, and that not long after that, he had went into the kitchen, threw up in the sink, and fell and hit his head on the granite countertop and ended up in the floor.
And did she tell you where in the house they were prior to Michael getting up and getting sick?
I believe they were she told me they were in the living room area. And also in that interview, I recall that she stated that she had recovered the bottle of enclomiphene citrate hidden in a cabinet instead of sitting on the kitchen counter as she had previously stated.
And lastly, what was her recollection of events of the morning of February 6th during your third interview with Mrs. Cochran?
During that interview, she indicated that, again, they had gone separate ways that morning and had returned home, and that upon returning home, Mr. Cochran had been sleeping on the couch for approximately 45 minutes to an hour, and that when he awoke shortly after that, he went into the kitchen and had collapsed. And also she introduced that in that interview that Michael Cochran was allegedly using insulin as part of a bodybuilding regimen, and that he readily kept insulin and needles in the home for the purpose of using that in his bodybuilding. I asked her if she had ever injected Michael as part of that to assist him. She indicated that she had not, that he injected himself. And I asked her if he had a common injection site that he preferred to use. And she listed or recited different areas on the body. But the one that stood out to me was she said that his back, or in the back. And that just seemed odd to me.
The prosecution also rested on this day. When the prosecution rests, that just means that the prosecution is done presenting evidence in its case in chief. The 6th day of Natalie's trial continued on January 23rd of 2025. On this day, defense chose to put on a case. The reason I say chose is because the prosecution bears the entirety of the burden in any criminal case. Defense does not have to put on a case if they choose not to, but in this case they did. The entirety of the 6th day was filled with familiar faces for Natalie. Defense first called her daughter, then her son, then her sister Penny. On day 7, January 27th of 2025, defense put on their own experts. Defense experts acted to counteract the prosecution's experts, specifically in their opinions about Michael's manner of death. Defense also put on the Cochran family physician, who testified that Natalie was indeed sick and he would have advised her not to travel on February 6th of 2019. As I stated at the beginning, this case is ongoing. They're in trial right now. Because I record my videos in advance, I'm sure there will be more updates by the time I post this. I believe the way things are going, there should be a conclusion to this case relatively soon. If you would like a part 2 or any additional updates, just go ahead and let me know down below. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe, and take care.
Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict?
Yes, sir.
Would you hand that verdict to the bailiff who will transmit it to the court? Would the defendant please rise? In the case of State of West Virginia versus Natalie Page Cochran, case number 23-F-343K, the jury verdict is as follows. We, the jury on the issues, joined unanimously find the following. The defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree.